My name is Joseph Wuellner, and I'm an application engineer with TriStar Incorporated. Today we are going to be taking a look at KeyShot, and this is going to be a webinar on KeyShot 8, primarily a webinar going over the workflow within KeyShot, understanding how we can take a model from a three-dimensional CAD modeling program, move it into KeyShot, and go through our workflow of creating our photorealistic renderings. Just a few things before we get into this workflow. This presentation is brought to you by TriStar Incorporated. If you would like more information regarding TriStar, please feel free to visit our website at tristar.com. You can also visit keyshot.com and get your own copy of the software there. There is a trial period, so if you would like to try it out for yourself after seeing this video, maybe take your own models, go in there and apply your own materials, views, different environments, and so on, you can do that by visiting their website and just using the trial version. This webinar is going to be primarily on the KeyShot interface and an introduction to the workflow. A lot of this information will be pretty basic if you are a KeyShot user already. But if you have not used KeyShot, this will be a good introduction to the capabilities of KeyShot and also give you an understanding of how to quickly get into KeyShot and use the workflows necessary to create renderings. KeyShot is a great software. It is a software with a very low skill ceiling or floor and a very high skill ceiling, meaning that you can get into the software and start working very effectively, very quickly, but you can always increase your proficiency and develop new skills, new abilities, and new techniques over time that will speed up your workflows and also increase the quality of your items or renderings. Very similar to design, it is something that is a combination of both science and art. So as you go through your own workflows, don't be afraid to try new things, try things that are a little bit outside of the box, and create your own unique flavor with your renderings. This KeyShot presentation will primarily go through the workflow, starting with an importation of model geometry. So KeyShot is a rendering software. It is not a modeling software, meaning that we will need to create our models first and then import them into KeyShot, where we can then go through the continuation to create our three-dimensional renderings. Once we have imported our geometry, then we can take a look at applying our materials. KeyShot is very strong when it comes to its material selection and availability. KeyShot has a large library of materials that you can apply. These materials will include not only color, but also texture and different opacities, different appearances of that already defined material. We also have the ability to configure our environment. Environments will allow us to determine the sphere in which our model resides and manipulate that environment so that we can achieve the lighting we would like. We also have the ability to specify different lighting settings. This will control the way in which rays bounce through our environment and off of our model. Depending on what we are trying to render, there are different lighting settings, meaning that if we are creating a rendering of a product, we may want different ray bounce properties than if we are creating a rendering of an environment or interior design. KeyShot, as far as ray bounces goes, is a progressive rendering software and uses different algorithms based on the kind of display you would like. So if you are using a product and you would like your light to reflect off of that product a certain way, then you would select that lighting algorithm and KeyShot will apply it to give you the most scientifically correct appearance of that product. You can always change that to optimize your appearance, and over time, as you will see, KeyShot will increase the number of rays bouncing throughout the program, increase that rendering display, and give you a progressive rendering that is CPU driven. All of that is really defined within our lighting settings. After that, we'll take a look at our camera settings. how we can manipulate our cameras, add new views, and also change the way in which those views are displayed. This will include changing our perspectives and changing our focal length as well as focal point. Then finally, once we've defined our cameras, we can create a rendering output. KeyShot is very flexible in that at any point throughout the process, you can always export a screen grab of your palette or of your canvas in a sense. So you can always say, okay, I've reached a point where I would like to export a picture of this already created rendering. You can export that, or you can go through all of this formal process and then formally create rendering settings that will give you a specified output. Once we've gone through this workflow, I also want to just introduce you to a few resources that you can explore on your own. Most of these are provided by KeyShot already. They have done a great job, I think, of really fostering a community on different media outlets. They have a lot of information that can be used for beginners to intermediate users, and I would like to just give you a little bit of a reference so you can go ahead and explore this material on your own. So with that, let's go ahead and move into KeyShot. Here I'm just going to go ahead and launch it. And now that we are in KeyShot, you can see a bit of the environment. Upon launching KeyShot, we do have this Welcome to KeyShot 8 pop-up appear. This is very useful just to go through different items that they've already introduced or new things that they're introducing, including different BIPs or different projects that they've already created for you to explore these new concepts. So you have things like this cutaway BIP. We also have displacement. So this has been added in KeyShot 8. And the configurator, which can be used to create different configurations of the same object. All of that can be accessed here in this welcome screen, but let's go ahead and move into our environment. So here in the KeyShot 8 environment, we do have a couple of different regions. At the very top, we have our header. Here we can access all of our different workspaces, our CPU usage, as well as toggle performance mode. KeyShot is a CPU-based rendering program, meaning that it is not GPU dependent. So instead, it uses your CPU to progressively render those ray bounces and deliver you a photorealistic version of your object. Here we can see my CPU usage is currently set to 50. We can always go to that drop-down menu and change it to use a specific amount of cores of my CPU. This is good just to understand so that if you need to perform different actions, you can always change your CPU usage and toggle through that. Then we have the ability to pause. This will just pause rendering, completely stop that CPU usage, as well as toggle performance mode, which is a very quick way to see what is going on in our scene without using that CPU to render every single bounce. We also have here a couple of different items that are open for us. So on this left side of the screen, we have the library. The library includes our material selection. As you can see, there are a lot of different materials included with KeyShot. Each material is put within its specific category. You can always expand those categories and view the material types within that category. As you select these, you can see the materials appear here. These materials have names. They also have displays. Each material has its own specific properties. These properties include their default colors and textures. Once we have added a material, we can always change the color and texture of that material, apply different properties to that default material to really customize it and get the feeling that we're going for. Then after our color and textures, we do have the environments within our library. This includes our default Hdr Eyes. And Hdr Eyes are the sphere in which our model will reside. So if I zoom out here, you can see a sphere currently empty. I haven't added my model yet, but this HDRI environment will determine that default lighting that is taking place just from that exterior surface. You can always add models within the environment and then apply lights as materials to those models to have more dynamic lighting but the HDRI environment does allow you to very quickly have high quality lighting in a time-sensitive fashion. We also have backplates. These are used for that backplate view. You can upload your own photos or use some of these photos here within the environment. These are just some default ones. You can always then fit your camera to match the perspective of the photo. This will allow you to have a more realistic view of your model. And then finally, we have favorites. Here you can go ahead and just create your own folders, which can be a collection of anything within this library. That way you can just quickly reuse objects, reuse materials, environments, or backplates as you see fit. Then we have down here at the very bottom our cloud library, and this can be used to access the cloud library for KeyShot. This has additional materials, backplates, textures, and environments. You can see as I hover over it, it does have that little tooltip, and KeyShot does do a good job of doing this for most things. But this will just allow you to access more materials, more of those HDRI environments. So if you need more of these presets, you can always pull them from the cloud library. And then we have down here just our basic UI. We have the ability to toggle on and off that library. We can import geometry. We can toggle our animation, which would allow us to create different animations that we're not going to go over today. And then also our KeyShot XR, which allows us to create our XR versions of our models as well. Then finally, we have the rendering option. This will just give us that ability to output a rendering of our screen or palette. We can always use this screenshot option over here to just quickly capture a grab of our canvas when we see fit. And then we also have the product or project section over here on the right side. We will go over that a little bit more once we import some geometry. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in some geometry. We can do this just by going to this import option here. And once I've done that, I'm just going to be browsing within my computer for different CAD files. So in this case, I'm browsing for all formats. I can always go to my drop down here and choose a specific type. As you can see, there are a lot of different file types that we can choose from. We have most of the mainstream computer-aided design software types, and we also have transfer files that can be brought in if necessary. We also have the KeyShot options. These KeyShot files will include a package or just a BIP. These are different exportable file types from KeyShot that can be used to transfer from one computer to another, one workstation to another. Now let me go ahead and just select an assembly. Once I've selected my assembly, I do have this KeyShot import wizard, and usually going through this import takes maybe about a minute and a half. It's very quick, but I just want to go through a little bit more in detail exactly what is going on. So we can specify for this assembly our location. We can center the geometry. We can snap to the ground. If we want it floating, we can always deselect this. Usually it's best to just leave these location options alone and then modify our geometry once it's been imported. Then we have our up orientation. This is being pulled from my computer-aided design tool. So I do have that default coordinate system, and I'm just going to reference its Y vector to determine my up orientation. Then we also have the environment and camera options. We can adjust the camera to look at geometry, adjust environment to fit geometry. All of this can be changed after the fact as well. And then our materials and structures. KeyShot is an interesting program in the way that it divides up our model. Since this is an assembly, it is made up of components, so those components will each have their own distinct definition when it comes to materials. But along with component variations or differentiations, we also have the color differentiation that comes directly from my modeling software as well. So since a couple of my components use different materials in different areas within my software, I went ahead and just added specific colors to those surfaces so that I can manage them separately within KeyShot. You can always split up the surfaces after within KeyShot, but usually it's just a best practice to go ahead and do that external within your CAD tool. That way you don't have to worry about handling it in KeyShot. It just speeds up that workflow and allows you to go through this a little bit faster. And then we also have this geometry tab. Here we can see the tessellation quality. This is important for any computer-aided design information that is coming over that we want to have good resolution. So the higher this tessellation quality, the smaller our triangles will be for the tessellated surfaces. It does transfer, or KeyShot rather, does transfer the information from NURBS data to tessellated data. That way it can process it a lot faster, but if we desire that original NURBS data, we can always import it here. Also, if you have an animation that has been defined within your computer-aided design tool, then you can import an animation using a .fra file. This way you can configure the animation within your native design tool and then reference that animation in KeyShot. That way you don't have to worry about relearning a whole new interface for animation. Anyway, let's go ahead and just import now. And once we import our geometry, we can see over here in the project tab, or rather in the project tree on the scene tab, our model sets. And currently our model set is just sunglasses. If we expand this node, we can see the individual components that make up these sunglasses. And we can expand these components to see the individual surfaces that are split by the appearance applied within that native CAD program. So here I have my sunglasses. Within my sunglasses, I have the frame, I have lenses, I have the stem. The stem, as you can see, has two different subcategories determined by the appearances applied. And I can use those categories to differentiate between places or regions where I'm applying appearances within KeyShot. Now to start applying appearances, I can go ahead and go to my library. And within my library, I do have my different materials that I can apply. I can always just choose colors and textures separately, but it is good to start with materials, as materials will include their already defined colors and textures. KeyShot, once more, has done a really good job with their material library. There are a lot of different materials here to choose from, so depending on what I am trying to show in my model, I can always select the proper material and apply it. So here I know I want these lenses to be a glass color. I may want them to be black. I'll go ahead and just left click and hold, drag that over, and hover over the place where I would like to apply it. Now I can just release, and as you can see, it has been added to both of those lens components. So these lens components are automatically linked upon entering KeyShot because they are the same component. I can always right click one and unlink the material. Now if I select another material, drag it over and drop it, you can see it will be only applied to that specific component here. This is a common theme in KeyShot, so you can always link or unlink materials. That just speeds up the workflow. It's very intuitive. Most of this is done just by right-clicking and choosing an option from the right-click menu. We also have a couple of hotkeys that are useful. You can always view the hotkeys just by hitting the K key. That will pull up the KeyShot hotkey menu. And if you would like, you can always go to your edit and go to preferences. And within preferences, you can go to the hotkeys menu, change their configuration, or even change the camera control. So I use primarily Creo. I would select Creo here from the hotkey preset, and that way I will have my same intuitive camera motions, camera control that I would have in my native design program. As you can see, there are different options here as well. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue to apply materials. Next, I just want to color the frame. Let's go ahead also and select this. I would like to copy this material. I'm going to relink it over here so I can right click and paste linked material. Now I can move on to this frame. I know I want it to be metal, so I can go to the Metals tab, and there I can see different metals displayed. So maybe I don't know exactly what color I want this frame to be yet, but just by looking at these metals, I can get an idea of the different options I have, as well as the different options I can deviate from. So here I'll just go ahead. I like this orange color, so I'll just drag it over and drop it. And you can see that automatically it has been added. I do want this frame here to be linked to this material here on the stem. So if I just grab that same material and drag it over and drop, here I have the option of linking these materials. I'll go ahead and say yes. And now if I change one, it will propagate to both. So I can just continue to drag and drop these materials. As you can see, when I move around in KeyShot, there is this fuzziness that appears. This is the automatic, or rather that progressive rendering taking place. If I hit the H key, I can see exactly how many FPS I'm seeing in my screen. I can also see the time that the rendering has been taking place and how many samples have been taken. This can be really useful just to understand more intuitively how the rendering is taking place, how fast it's taking place, and that way you can use these settings for your rendering output or choose to screenshot to create a rendering on the fly. Let's go ahead and go to plastic, and there within plastic we have rubber. So I can quickly find these. I can just grab that rubber, drag it over, and drop it, and apply that material. And now once all of my materials have been applied, I can always go to the Material tab. There we have this Material menu. A good practice is to go to the Material tab and make sure all of the default materials that have been imported with your geometry are replaced. That way you know that every single surface has been accounted for, every material has been applied, and you are going to have the best possible output for your geometry. We can always edit the materials here too. So if I double click on a material, its properties will appear. Here I can manage its properties directly. I can manage the type. I can view its material graph, which is a node-based display of the material definition. So here we can see the noise texture. It's being used for the bump, which is in turn being used to determine the surface of this material. Then we have the diffuse, which is defined. We have our specular, roughness. All of this can be modified. We can go to the textures tab, either in this material graph or in the materials section, and there we can change even more options for this material. So as you can see, even though we can just drag and drop materials, we always have the option to go back and really specify exactly what these materials represent. I won't go too in depth here. We can continue to move on with this workflow, but just understand this is here for you to investigate later on if you would like. Then we can go to the environment, and here within the environment tab, we can see our Hdr Eye. So right now, our Hdr Eye is this sphere in which our glasses reside. We can always go over here to the library and go to the environments tab, and there we can access different Hdr Eyes. Here the 3 panel is nice. I can always drag and drop that. You can see that now we have 3 panels of light, that gray bottom and the black top, which just gives us specific refraction on our materials. You can also see that the Hdr Eye environment is reflected in our surfaces. And if we have KeyShot Pro, we can always use this Hdr Eye editor, which lets us change the way different pins are displayed, add pins, or change maybe from gradient to sun and sky, or use an image. There are a lot of presets though, and usually these presets are good enough. You can always go to the cloud library, and there you can find more presets. They are very nice. You do have the ability to use sun and sky interior, outdoor. All of these are provided with the initial installation, and you can find more online. Once we have applied our environment, we can always change it. We can adjust its brightness. We can do that either by using the draggers or just entering a value. KeyShot is really great in that you can always just specify a value. You can use the drag option. Often these draggers, let's say I drag it way over here, now it jumps back down, and we have even further that we can drag it out to. So it is ratio based, and that length that you can drag the value to will increase as you change the brightness, or really any setting. Then we can transform, so we can change the size of our environment to better match our needs. We can change the height. We can rotate it. And then we also have our background tab. And this background tab is usually what we play with the most. By default, our background, as you can see, is our lighting environment. We can always change it to a color. Right now it's a solid color. I can click on the color to modify it. I can use my eyedropper tool to select a color from my model to place it on. So you can see that looks pretty good. We can also choose to use a backplate image. And a backplate image would allow us to select an image from either our local file system or from the KeyShot library. So I can always go over here to the library, choose backplate, and select an image to place my object in. So maybe they're giant sunglasses in my warehouse. Then the next step from the environment would be our lighting. And the lighting controls those ray bounces. Right now we are on basic. The biggest thing to note here is that we can go to performance mode, and performance mode turns off shadows, it turns off ray bounces, turns everything down to the lowest possible quality, and that way we can just quickly apply materials and see our scene develop. We don't usually use performance mode to create our final rendering. We would want either something like product, interior, or jewelry. And you can see as I click on those, my ray bounces have changed. Everything changes in my environment. My shadow quality, ray bounces. We also have the ability to change that rendering technique. So if we are working on an interior design, we might want to change our algorithm to match the complexity of that interior reflection. Or if it's just a product, we might want to use that product algorithm. So depending on whichever application you are performing, you may want to change that rendering technique. You can always specify your own values too, and then create custom lighting. Usually this isn't too important when you first start working with KeyShot. This might be something you revisit a little bit later on. But then we have the camera tab. Within the camera tab, we can configure our specific cameras. We can always add our own new cameras and specify those cameras for different renderings. We also have the ability to specify the camera values. So maybe I want to zoom in and I want to do this with some kind of accuracy. I can always perform that here in the environment. I may want to change my lens settings. So within the lens, I can choose perspective. I may want to match the perspective, and this can be very useful. And this will give me some vectors to work with. So I can say my Y direction, something like this. My X maybe here, and then my Z it's here. And that just lets me orient my perspective with my backplate so I can match those geometry lines from my backplate, and that way my model will be a little bit more in alignment with that image that I'm trying to insert it in. Then we can always play with the lighting. That way the lighting environment would match our backplate image. That would allow us to place our object in an environment. If we aren't using a backplate, then we do want to go back to that environment, go to color, and usually just use our eyedropper tool to match something on our geometry. We can always add within our camera tab depth of field as well, and this can add a very nice look to our model and make it a lot more photorealistic. So I may want to choose a focal point, and then once I choose a focal point, I can adjust that f-stop. This is similar to adjusting the f-stop on a camera, so it determines what part of your object would be in focus and how much of it would be out of focus. And that way you would be able to add that depth to your object. And as you can see, when we let the object sit, the samples will increase, everything will smooth out, and we can have a lot more perspective within our rendering. And then finally, once we have specified all of our camera settings, we can always create our export option. So here within the image tab, we can define our resolution. Our resolution can be locked or unlocked. We can always use presets too. So we have landscape, portrait, we have custom presets that we can define. And once we have chosen our resolution, then we can choose to either screenshot, or we can go to the render tab, and within the rendering option, we have the ability to give our file a name, a format, and then designate a folder. We can always specify the resolution here as well, and we can choose different layers and passes to export. So if you plan on having multiple passes to increase the quality of a final rendering, you can do that here. We have the options tab, so we can specify how many cores will be used for our creation or our rendering, how many samples. This is where we would come to specify really our rendering output. So quality, you can see maximum samples. For reference, we can look at our image, and within this image, we can see here in this heads-up display our current sample, so 164. It's looking pretty good, so we may want to set our samples for maybe 170, and then we can render. We can also choose maximum time, so right now it's been about a minute, 2 minutes. We could set our maximum time, and that way we can control the quality of our render. And if you have KeyShot Pro, you can create a queue. Queues will allow you to have multiple renderings going in sequence. So once one rendering ends, the next would begin. That way you can specify a bunch of different renderings to be performed and then walk away from your computer or workstation, come back, and they will all be done for you maybe an hour or two later, 15 minutes later, who knows. Then we can always render, and as we render, we will see the rendering taking place. During this rendering time, we can always hit the X. This will stop the render, and we can save. So when we stop the rendering, it will just stop, and we can choose to either save at that point or just stop the render process and return back to the KeyShot interface. And that is pretty much our workflow for KeyShot. As you can see, it is very simple, very quick. It does allow you to perform a lot within a short amount of time, and it does allow for a lot of learning. So if you do want to learn how to manage your materials specifically, you can do that. If you would like to make presentations that allow you to vary your materials on the fly, you can always use the configuration editor for something like that. If you want to be able to use cameras to control your focal point or perspective and have multiple cameras, you can use that option. And you have the ability for KeyShot to use different plugins for your native CAD program. And that will make this process even faster, letting you go seamlessly from the CAD tool to KeyShot and back again to push changes through. And with that, that is the end of my demonstration. I would just like to show you once more a few things before I end. So just review a few resources so you can take a look. And my resources are going to begin with the KeyShot website. So going to keyshot.com, you will land on their splash page. Here on the splash page, you can always try it for free. So you can download the full software and use it for a demo period. That way you can try out all of these different options yourself, see if you are able to make your photorealistic images yourself, and then if you want, you can purchase it or not, you know, whichever. But it is, I like it a lot. And then we also have the gallery, and the gallery is super cool. It has a bunch of different items that we can view. So we have customer spotlights. We also have different artists that have created their own specific renderings. This can give you a lot of inspiration for your own renderings, give you an idea of perspective, give you an idea of different materials that you might apply and different lighting that you might apply. You can also see what kind of design software they use. So different artists use different design software. If you are working more with figures, then you would want something like ZBrush. If you're working with more parametric objects, then you would want something like SolidWorks, Creo, or Inventor. And then we also have here in the resources page different downloads. So we have the plugins within the downloads. Here we have different plugins that would apply directly to your CAD program. So you can see the different plugins for your different softwares. This will allow you to integrate KeyShot directly with that program so you can have linked sessions. That way, if I make a change in my design program, I can very quickly propagate that to KeyShot and vice versa. And also we have tutorials and quick tips. These can be very useful when you first begin. KeyShot has done a great job creating a video library of different topics. You can go to their KeyShot resources here, take a look at different rendering tutorials, different animation tutorials, and you have the manual, which can be very useful to really perfect your technique within KeyShot. All right, and that is the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If you would like, you can always reach out to any of our representatives here at TriStar. They can put you in contact with me. So let's now just open up the floor to questions. Samantha, go ahead. Hello. Where does it show pricing for the software? That is a good question. Pricing. Let's take a look at buy. Here, so KeyShot 8 HD is right here. Then we have KeyShot Pro, KeyShot Pro floating. So the difference between Pro and floating would be KeyShot 8 Pro would be locked to a single computer. Floating is accessible by any computer on a network that can access the license server. And then KeyShot 8 Enterprise would allow you to use network rendering and KeyShot XR. The biggest difference between KeyShot 8 and KeyShot 8 Pro would be that you have the ability to perform animations in KeyShot 8. You also have the ability to use that queue, and let's see what else. Oh, the Hdr editor would probably be another big thing. All right, any other questions? Good question. So it is subscription based, meaning that it would be 365 days. Most software, it seems, are moving towards that subscription idea. Depending on whichever program you're using, you might want to control or compare KeyShot with the rendering software that might be integrated within your design program. I know Creo does have a plugin or an extension that allows for rendering. That rendering uses pretty much the same software as KeyShot, but for about half the price. It is less of an advanced program. It doesn't really have everything KeyShot does. It's not quite as enjoyable, but that is an option. So there are competitive options. KeyShot is quite a good program, though. Yeah. So if you have Pro E, then you can quickly use KeyShot, and you can use it as KeyShot 8. There is also a rendering extension for Creo, and it's powered by Luxion, meaning that you have pretty much the same ray tracing. It doesn't have the same material abilities or the same animation suite. But yeah, KeyShot would work quite well with Creo. All right, well, if there are no other questions, it has been a pleasure. If you have any questions in the future, please do let me know, or let one of the sales representatives here at TriStar know. We would be happy to help. If you do end up getting this software and you would like some help creating better renderings or understanding the workflow, also feel free to reach out. We would be happy to support you there. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end this presentation. Please have a great day. And if I talk to you in the future, I look forward to it. Thank you.